I'm Allison Jonjak, the Cranberry Outreach Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. These videos are the on-demand recordings of UW Extension and the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association's virtual brown bag lunch series. These monthly sessions offer growers and researchers a way to share timely and relevant information. We hope you'll enjoy and continue to engage with us.
Hi, I'm Tom Lochner, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin State Cranberry Growers Association. We're excited to be a partner with Extension to bring you research-backed resources, tools, and tips to keep Wisconsin marshes productive and profitable.
Welcome you to the July 21st virtual brown bag. Our July season is, of course, the last growing season updates brown bag before we will meet in person at the Summer Field Day and Trade Show on August 9th. So for a little bit of housekeeping, I have transcripts on. If you're not seeing those, click up in the settings and you should be able to see the live transcripts. Go ahead and keep yourself muted unless you are asking a question. I do like to encourage people to ask questions live and throughout. I think both verbal questions, or if you type questions in the chat box, you can either set that to everyone or you can set it to Allison Jonjak. If you set it to just me, then I'll ask that question anonymously on your behalf. We're going to have a couple of polls in today's session, and if you're on mobile, that might not be the easiest, so feel free to type your thought or share your thought verbally if your voting's not working. And yeah, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Tom for a quick welcome from the Growers Association.
Oh, well, thanks, Allison. We just welcome everybody to our July brown bag seminar. We do these routinely throughout the year, and we try to make the topics timely to what's going on in the growing season. Allison does a good job of that, working along with the education committee. So we are excited to continue to provide this service to growers. And actually, as I look at the participants list, it's pretty much across North America. So we'd welcome you to today's brown bag. Just one quick reminder and announcement is that, of course, the summer meeting, field day, and trade show is coming up August 9th. Allison mentioned that. We will be at the research station again this year. We expect to turn out vendors and growers. We would encourage you to get your reservations in or order your meal tickets so we can make sure we have a good count. We have some new things to show at the research station. We've got 12 different projects going on that will be highlighted during the mini clinic on the marsh programming throughout the day, and hopefully we'll have things of interest to anybody and everybody that wants to participate. And of course, it also gives growers the chance to have conversations with one another and really do a lot of networking, in which we encourage as well. So it's a major event for us, and your participation is important for us to have a successful day, and we hope to see you there. So with that, Allison, I'll turn it back over to you, and looking forward to hearing from today's speakers.
Yeah, fantastic. We are going to have today our usual observations from the field, but due to a lot of the interns being on vacation, several of our usual suspects in the scouting world and the IPM world were not able to join because they're actually out scouting. So I'm going to give just some quick observations from the field. Then we're going to have two what I think will be very useful and informative presentations. I have them in reverse order on this slide here, but Colquhoun is going to give us a lot of information on new plantings, best practices for making new plantings, fertilizing and weed treating new plantings, the whole gamut. And then Christelle Godot is going to give us information on flea beetle updates. So that's going to be everything from life cycle questions to what chemistries are our best bets right now to nematode projects that are ongoing. So everything new plantings. And then also Jed was going to have a little bit on tank mix information as well. And then everything flea beetle.
Thanks very much. And to Allison again for hosting us. And of course, thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. I've been tasked today with covering a little bit of information on new planting weed management. And for many of you, this will be a complete review. So we'll go through it fairly quickly. but I wanted to highlight the options that you do have available to get clean new plantings of cranberries. So let's start with the simple goal for new planting weed management. And I can't emphasize it enough, the importance of starting clean, keeping the vines free of weeds until they're competitive enough and form enough of a vining canopy that they can suppress new weed invasions. And the basic reason for that is like Benjamin Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It's a lot easier to be in maintenance mode than it is to play catch up. And most often when growers are complaining about vast weed outbreaks in relatively new plantings, when I visit them, it's most often in areas where the vines have not taken as well. And that leaves gaps and openings where weeds can, of course, catch more light, water, and nutrients than the nearby vines. So the marshes that I see that are the cleanest started the cleanest, and they're in maintenance mode to be able to do that, as opposed to trying to play catch up with a limited number of weed management tools that we have. So how do we do that? How do we start clean? Number one, just as a review, keep in mind to keep your inputs as clean as possible, or at least know what enemy is coming with the inputs that you're using to renovate. Hillary Sandler and company did some good work several years ago on looking at one of those sources of potential new weed invasions, and that would be the sand stockpiles that you use at renovation to create a new bed. And I find this still very interesting that nationally, they found 74 plant species from 23 plant families and doing simple germination bioassays on the sand piles used to create new plantings. Wisconsin participated in that survey study. In Wisconsin, they found 19 plant species identified, 79% of which are considered problematic weeds in production beds. So really simple, knowing what's growing on top of that sand pile, maybe doing some control on what's emerging in the time prior to using that sand for a new planting, would pay dividends in terms of limiting the weed seed bank that's put in the soil. Once it's there, there's nothing we can do to manage all of those weeds at one time. It's like a bank. It's like putting it into the check or the savings account, and it'll emerge over years. So other sources of potential invasions, vine clippings can harbor perennial weed vegetative root and stem tissue that can reproduce clonally, just like the cranberries that you're intentionally spreading to regrow. The weeds can be in those bales also and be transported and planted unintentionally in a new bed. Equipment can also move vegetative material and weed seeds. So taking a few minutes to just bang off the brush or any sort of vegetative tissue or sand that may harbor weed seeds before moving to a new bed can limit spread. In terms of the vine clippings, of course, the easiest way to know is to visit them before you purchase them and before they're mowed, and ask questions about what sort of weed issues have been in those beds. So it's not only about finding good producing cranberries, but knowing some about the cultural management and any sort of problems that you may inherit bringing them into a new planting. So in terms of herbicides, this is going to be a really quick review because these are old standbys, but what I've done basically is taken what we have in new plantings. There are a few others that we don't really use in production, and I've narrowed it down into what I think is the most reasonable program for you to be able to establish clean cranberries. That starts with glyphosate, known as Roundup, and many other trade names, of course. In site prep, we'll talk about Devernol, Evital, Callisto, and Select Max. So let's start with glyphosate. Of course, Roundup, many other trade names have been generic for many years. Just check the label to make sure the cranberry and the use pattern that you want to use it in cranberries are included on that label. There are so many glyphosate labels, we can't keep track of which have cranberry on it, hundreds. So just make sure before you load up the sprayer that cranberry's on it, the use pattern is on it. The best use pattern that I see for glyphosate is site preparation, what we call the stale seed bed. I mentioned the weed seed that may accompany the sand into the bed as you prepare for renovation. The easiest way to exhaust that savings of weed seed in the soil is to prepare the bed for planting, allow the weeds to germinate, and spray them post-emergent with something like glyphosate to eliminate those weeds prior to planting the cranberries. Basically, you're just trying to exhaust the weed seed reserve before you intentionally plant the cranberries, because then you're already playing catch up as soon as that happens. And it can be useful to irrigate. I know that's a bit painful at that time prior to actually planting, but irrigate the sand to intentionally grow the weeds if we don't get rainfall. You want to provide a good condition for the weeds to germinate, kill them. Don't till a lot again. You're already leveled and ready to go. And that'll stimulate more germination. But basically, spray the glyphosate. Wait at least 3 days before planting. That's a common question we often get. How long do I have to wait? That 3 days allows the weeds to die, allows the glyphosate, like you see in the picture, to be able to translocate to kill the weeds, particularly any sort of fast-growing perennials that may become established, but before new weeds germinate. So then you can plant and get in there with a residual pre-emergent herbicide before new weeds have germinated that they won't control. The next, and by far the most common option in new plantings, is Devernol. Apply after planting, but before a weed emergence. Devernol will not touch a weed that has germinated and emerged. It simply won't be controlled. And again, that's why we want that kind of narrow time after the last glyphosate to the planting, and then put on the Devernol. As a reminder, it's the weed control is best when Devernol is watered in within 24 hours. That gets the herbicide to where the weeds germinate, which is typically the top ½ inch to inch of soil. And Devernol is one that's very prone to photo decomposition. So could you wait longer? Yeah, probably, but you're going to have some decomposition. You might as well get as much as you can out of what you purchase. So get it incorporated into the soil to where the weeds germinate, top ½ inch to inch of soil, so that it can work optimally for new planting weed management. And keep in mind that rate is reduced for new plantings compared to established plantings. The strengths, of course, grasses, some annual broadleaves, but primarily a grass herbicide. Also, grass herbicide, as well as rushes and sedges. A lot of you have used Evital 5G. Again, this is one where it's very important to apply reduced rates in new plantings. New cranberries can be injured by Evital, and sometimes quite severely. So a lot of growers are using much reduced rates, less than half of what would be allowed on the new planting, if they use it at all. And I think it's important to know that injury risk and weigh that against whether you've had an issue with rushes and sedges, or you expect a lot of grasses that won't be controlled with some of the other options we're going to talk about. Again, you want to irrigate after application, and cranberries can be particularly injured if you have any puddling. Let's hope in a new planting everything is nice and laser leveled and such, but your highest risk is where Evital puddles, and that's where we see the greatest amount of injury. And we all know Callisto and the other generic trade names that are available in the cranberry market now. I would say Devernol's a standby. Callisto has now become a standby in that after bud break, after the new planting starts growing, up until 45 days before flooding or winter. Of course, we all know the benefit is that pre-residual control in a new planting. We would expect 6 or 8 weeks of control, as well as some post-emergent control of young emerged weeds. New plantings, this will provide broad spectrum weed control, particularly of grasses and the common annual species. One important note, we often are asked, well, how much Callisto should I use in a new planting? I would say over the years, that rate is reduced, maybe to the range of 4 to 6 ounces. And that rate even is higher than the use rate in corn for common annual weeds. So you can expect to get pretty good annual weed control in the new planting at those rates. And you can come back and make a second application at least 2 weeks after the first, limited to 2 applications per season. But between those two, even at a reduced rate, you should get a really strong start on general weed control. Some cranberry discoloration can be observed. Remember, it's pretty stressful to bury roots and ask them to regrow. And that's when we see injury to cranberries in a stressful situation. It's typically quite transient. We've never seen a long-term impact from that, but it's something you might see and worth noting. And finally, Select Max. So we've used Devernol, we've used our Callisto maybe twice. We get these grasses that continue to pop up. You can use something like Select Max, clethodim being the active ingredient. Post-emergent control of grasses only, no residual control, absolutely no broadleaf weed control. Broadleaf weeds typically don't even have a well-expressed enzyme that Select Max works on. So that's also why we can use it in cranberries. We don't injure it because we don't have an actively expressed ACCase enzyme. Can you injure cranberries with Select Max? Of course, particularly in established plantings between hook and fruit set. But a lot of that is driven by the surfactant required to make Select Max work. It's very good at annual and perennial grasses. You might need a little higher rate with the perennial grasses, but the annuals are controlled readily. You can do this repeatedly up to 4 times per season, as long as the seasonal maximum isn't exceeded, and you have at least 2 weeks before or between applications. And keep in mind, sometimes it takes 2 weeks for you to know if it worked. How do you know if it worked? Pull on the growing point. Even if the plant is green and you grab the absolute newest leaf on the grass, tug on it. If it comes out easily and it's brown and rotted where it meets the sheath in the stem of the grass, it's dead. So sometimes it can be green. Check that before you go out and apply again. Save a little money and time because it might not be needed in another application. It's also important to note, though, that grass resistance is pretty common to this class of, or this site of action of herbicides, where they've been used repeatedly for multiple seasons. Globally, it's very common that we see ACCase resistance. That's the enzyme that Select Max works on. So while you can use it repeatedly, do the best that you can to diversify your tactics so that you don't end up with resistant grasses, because again, once they're in that seed bank, they're not going away and they're not going to be returning to susceptible. So with that, I wanted to offer just something that Allison mentioned in the beginning. She was doing some observations on some studies we're doing together on new plantings. We're currently evaluating 3 potential herbicides in new plantings, and thanks to our hosts for these studies. There are 2 that are actually, this is a little bit of a backwards situation. There are 2 that are recently registered on cranberry, but they haven't been tested widely. Now, how could that possibly happen? They were labeled on what is called a crop grouping. In this case, it's a small fruit grouping, basically. And in that small fruit grouping of crops, it includes cranberry. So technically, they're labeled on cranberry, but the reason we haven't shared their names with you, and we're not going to today, is because we're also evaluating crop safety and the weed control spectrum. What do they control? And we want to make absolute sure that they're safe on cranberries. But that's kind of exciting. We have 2 that we've covered really the greatest hurdle, which is the regulatory world. And now we need to just ensure that they're safe, and then the registrants will share them on commercial labels if we can show that. And we can figure out if they're worth spraying. Do they control something that's problematic to you? And then we have 1 that has a tolerance established, and it could be added to the label if crop safety is ensured. About a week and a half ago, I met with the registrant at this trial, and we went through the crop safety. And we'll take this through harvest, of course, to make sure there's good yield and quality on those berries. So good news, we may have to be able to have a longer talk on new plantings here shortly.
I did want to also
go ahead, Allison.
I just wanted to give a special shout out to, usually we set up our grower collaborators in kind of like the January, February timeframe. For this new planting one, we had a planned cooperator for that, and they had mechanical difficulties. And so at literally 23 hours before Devernall was going to go out with our cooperator, we were able to get a plot reserved for our research. So a special thank you for letting us conduct that research on super short notice. Very, very grateful.
Yep, we're always grateful for our cooperators. I know it's kind of painful to have us put a little block in the middle and ask you to go around it, but thank you for that. So just a few notes on tank mixing. We get so many questions on tank mixing, and to be honest, they're quite challenging to answer because it's really like a game of 20 questions. If you think about the number of pesticides that we have, insecticide, fungicide, herbicide, the number of other compounds you may have in there, drift retardants, different plant health compounds, the adjuvants themselves, the surfactants, there's no possible way, and these surfactants change every single season. There's no possible way we could test every cocktail and tell you if it's safe and if it works. So instead of that, I thought what I'd do here briefly is tell you kind of our way of thinking to be able to determine whether it's a good idea to try this or not. What's kind of the rubric? How do we go through filtering through this? So the questions that we ask ourselves even. Number one, the legal question. Do all the labels for the potential tank mix partners allow for the tank mix? So when we look at labels, sometimes the label will suggest specific tank mixes. That doesn't mean that you're prohibited from doing others, but it's often at your own risk. Some labels specifically say, do not tank mix. That's really important. They don't put that on there just for kicks. It's because something's gone wrong and they don't want the product tank mix. There's too much liability. Generally though, a lot of them will say, this product can be tank mixed with other products labeled on Cranberry, but follow the most restrictive label when it comes to everything involved, the re-entry intervals, everything involved. Follow the most restrictive label of anything in that tank. So then the second question we ask, are they compatible in the tank? I've had unfortunate situations, and even one in research this year with Allison, where some of these products just don't go through the boom well. They don't mix well in the tank. Commercially, I've been involved in situations where people have made literally what looks to be 400 gallons of cottage cheese in a sprayer. It's very hard to get out, and it's a compatibility issue, a physical compatibility. So how do we know if they're compatible or not? You do the old-fashioned jar test. Get a jar that won't be used for anything else and is labeled as pesticides, and mix a little bit and make sure that they're physically compatible in the jar. So then you're ensured it won't mess up your sprayer too badly. And then are the adjuvant requirements the same for all the potential tank mix partners? And I know of a few situations this spring where unfortunately someone grabbed an adjuvant, let's say for a fungicide, but that fungicide was not compatible with the grass herbicides, and it caused injury to the cranberries. So they put the grass herbicide in with the fungicide, and maybe just didn't recognize that that fungicide adjuvant was different than the requirement for the grass herbicide, and that can be injurious to cranberries. And then the final question is there any evidence via the neighbors, networks, research, etc., of synergistic or antagonistic effects when the products are tank mixed? The synergistic effects are usually not good on cranberries. It's an increased risk of injury in that case. And we do have some of those, and particularly in other crops, where adding more things to the tank heats one up, we say, and that's usually not good for the crop. It's usually not good for pest management when there's an antagonistic effect, when you add something to the tank and it reduces its efficacy as a pesticide. And we actually, in other crops, like snap beans, for example, we intentionally, the label requires that we add Basagran herbicide to the herbicide Raptor to be able to use it on snap beans. because it antagonizes the raptor enough that it becomes safe on snap beans. So we intentionally do this sometimes, but you don't want to unintentionally do it and reduce the efficacy of the products that you're operating with. So yes, it does happen. And you need to make sure there's no evidence of that that we know of. And finally, just some lessons from the field, particularly in the last decade or so. I would say that the cocktails that we're spraying have become even more complex. Avoid too many ingredients. I've been involved in many different crop injury situations where the result is having so many things in the tank, we don't know how they operate together. And they've never been, as I mentioned in the beginning, they've never been put together in this combination because literally it would be, thousands of product combinations tested to get to these cocktails. I'm talking about situations where I have 6 or 7 things in the tank. So particularly when you have unknown adjuvants that we know are a risk to cranberries, or other products are involved, fertilizers, drift retardants, plant health products, etc. If you don't know, the second piece is certainly try it in a small area first. I understand nobody likes driving around the marsh multiple times and separating things out into other tanks. It's expensive and time consuming, but it's also high risk. So consider trying it in a small area first. Cranberries are extremely unique crops. They're not tested across the country like we do in corn and soybeans. We're in little regional pockets where we test as much as we can. So what works in other crops may not necessarily hold true for the uniqueness of cranberries. Then finally, like I mentioned with Callisto and a new planting, in general, stress plants are more susceptible to potential pesticide injury than well-growing, actively growing plants. And as I mentioned, a new planting is a rather stressful situation, particularly in the early stages, as we're trying to establish these vines to make them more competitive with weeds and get to our earliest harvest possible. So don't set them back by putting too many things in the tank that will delay that early growth. And Allison, I believe, one more shameless plug, if you don't mind. We recently put in the newsletters, and we'll hand out a paper copy of this at the upcoming summer field day. But I'd encourage you to visit our Cranberry Back to Basics course. We're quite proud to have all the specialists and a lot of growers involved in producing this Back to Basics course. It's a combination of a printed publication like what you see and what we'll hand out at the August summer field day. But each one of these videos, if you click on the electronic version or scan the QR code, goes to a unique video that we produce. There are 30 professionally produced and edited videos in the publication that we change over time as we get new information. But this is our framework for a Back to Basics course. And I encourage you to scan the code on the screen. The upper right will send you to all the YouTube videos. Or go to the recent newsletters and you can find the link to the electronic version, the digital version of the publication there. We did that, about 3 weeks ago, Allison, and we've had 1,600 visitors or 1,600 video watches so far. So it's off to a strong start, but please use it. And most importantly, provide us some feedback for what's missing, what's wrong, and what we could do differently. So we can evolve this new tool into something most useful for you.
One of those things
that, Allison, is
wonderful.
my last slide.
All right. One of the things that's really useful about that online course format is if people have feedback or say, hey, we need a video on this thing you didn't think of, we don't have to redo the whole program. We just make that video and add it. So do feel very welcome to give us a lot of feedback. Jen, I've got 2 questions for you, and I'll read the first one first and the second one second. You have a problem bed that we've been battling goldenrod on. This year we sprayed it twice with Callisto. It turned white to the ground, and now it is starting to come back. Is there any chance of the label changing to increase rates, or is this a war of attrition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel bad for you. I laugh because there's a particular bed where I have a study, and it's not that old of a bed, but that invasion has started and it's encroaching from the outside rim in. And it's just really hard to watch after the hard work the grower put in to get this bed to fruiting. So I have sympathy for this situation as it starts to encroach from the dikes around the edges and in. It is a war of attrition, unfortunately. We've asked the registrants now of all the generics and others, but we've also asked the regulatory folks. It would take a total new a total new registration process to get that, because the way the tolerance was established is based on the use pattern that's on the label. So if we change the use pattern to say, okay, I still want just a limit of 16 ounces, but I want to do it over 3 or 4 applications, we'd basically have to go out in the regulatory world, do that GLP work, probably through IR4, and then go to the registrant, get their support, go to FDA and EPA to get their approval of that. It would be the same process as when we originally labeled Callisto, which took about 10 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we've asked several times, so have your handlers? And it's been a dead end, to be honest, because it's super expensive.
Any follow-up? I'll be watching the chat for a follow-up to that one.
Yeah, probably a nasty gram after that one, but yeah.
That's
okay.
This one is more theoretical. With glyphosate being a chelating agent, do you think that this can cause long-term nutrition uptakes if it's broadcast sprayed on a bed as you're doing the preparation for planting?
That is a great question. No, I don't think that risk is very great for a couple of reasons. Number one, we have experience on these sandier soils for decades doing this, not necessarily all in cranberries, but it's extremely common to burn down crops or pre-plant crops, or even post-planting pre-emergence on a lot of crops. And we've never had that issue in those crops, particularly on coarse textured soils, low in organic matter.
Can I ask that question, since we have people kind of including in northern Wisconsin and including in other parts of the country? Do you know if that's a different answer in the peat world?
In the peat world, I still, is there a risk, more risk on those heavier soils? Maybe a little bit more, but keep in mind, you're only doing this once or twice. So the dose makes the poison. And in this case, it's such a limited exposure, particularly temporally in time, that no, I don't think there's a long-term consequence. The other thing in peat to keep in mind is this glyphosate is bound to the organic matter really tightly in peat. To the point where it's almost unavailable in many cases. And that happens very quickly. It happens usually within 24 hours. So if you're telling me you're out there doing this every week for 6 months, maybe that risk would be a little bit greater, but no, once or twice, I don't, I've not seen that happen. Good question though, I like it.
Yeah. Any other questions, whether from follow-up on the goldenrod war, or anything else for Jed? Otherwise, I will thank you very much, Jed. I think these refreshers of all the things that we should already know about new plantings can be really helpful. But while we do, I want to thank, in reverse order, Christelle for all the excellent flea beetle information. I want to thank Jed for the new planting information and the tank mix follow-ups. Remember Christelle's video on the tank mixing practices as well. And then thank Tom and the Growers Association for helping co-host these with University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. And I also want to thank all of you for joining, and all of you who asked questions today. I think the questions really make these great. We'll see you hopefully August 9th at the research station for the Summer Field Day and Trade Show.